So, hi everyone, this is Soren, Black Belt Mindset and Business Coach. We're very fortunate to have Erica Marmai, and she is a relationships coach. So, Erica, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Raj. Thank you.
Brilliant. So, tell me a bit about the relationship sort of program that you run, and how did you get into it?
Yeah, so I go into relationship coaching, I think, because of two reasons. One, I had a holistic therapy business where I was offering bodywork sessions and holistic health guidance to clients. And I realized that most people were coming to me with internal turmoil. They wanted to just get some soothing and some sort of relaxation. And most of the time would end up really having conversation at length about their relationship issues. And that really shed the light on where perhaps I needed support, where I wasn't really focusing energy on, and where I also was struggling in my relationships, and where I had been struggling over the years, coming from childhood and then sort of finding my way in my 20s, figuring out who I am, who I want in my life, and who I definitely don't want in my life, and also who I needed to become to help healthy relationships. And so at that time, I was in a new relationship myself with my partner Jack, of 7 years. And it really came to surface how much I was maybe not being myself in that relationship. I was practicing all the healthy, like yoga, therapy. I was doing inner work. I was going to take care of myself a lot of the time. But then I was showing up in my relationship not feeling quite safe being who I was and speaking my needs and all these things. And so that really came to light, and I became researching ways of understanding myself better, understanding my partner better, and that came down to really realizing that nobody really had ever taught me how to do relationships well. And so I'm very much into personal growth and self-development. And so I thought this was an area in my life that still needed a lot of care and attention. And so that's kind of how I went into it, through my own personal experience. And then my partner, Jack, as well, he also trained as a relationship coach at the end, because we fell in love with the process. And it's been a journey the past 7 years, I would say.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Can you remember in school when we had mathematics, English, history, and relationships? We didn't have relationships, did we? We didn't have relationship classes. So that's a big, area that we could do with.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what I tell people, just to normalize it, because people give themselves a hard time for not, doing relationships well. But the reality is that we only know how to do relationships based on what we witness growing up, but based on the kind of relationships we are aware of that are surrounding us. And that's the only point of reference we get, really. There's no encouragement or intention in how we do it and how to do it well. And then we're expected to do them well and never fail at them, and then when we do fail at relationships, which is just a perception, really, there's a lot of turmoil that comes up in us. And I think that brought me to a point where my mental health was very poor, and I didn't know how to take care of my own inner world, and I was judging myself, and I was taking things very personally, and that really showed up in my behavior. And I think I see a lot of people struggling with the same things, and that's just because we're not educated from the start to know what relationships actually entail. And I think that would be a really interesting change that we could experience if relationships were prioritized just like any other subject.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I understand the statistics around 56% of relationships end up in divorce. Is that about right? And why do you think that is the case?
Yeah, I think it fluctuates. I think at the moment in the US is like 53%, and we're not far off here in Europe as well. I think Europe fluctuates. I think Europe is actually higher, it's somewhere around the 60%. But yeah, I think there's multiple reasons, but one of them, which we just mentioned, really just we're not educated to know what do we need from relationships. What do we want? What are we looking for in a partner? And I think bottom line is often we're not very great at selecting the right kinds of partners. And also we don't know ourselves well enough to understand what we need. And if we do know, oftentimes we don't have the language. We don't know how to speak what we need because we're not encouraged, again, to speak relationally. So many of us were just never taught how to do relationships well. And, we enter them with unconscious expectations, outdated roles, and sometimes deep emotional wounds from the past, which impact our presence. And then we wonder why things fall apart, And I think sometimes people also confuse proximity with intimacy. Often we're coexisting, but we're not truly connected. And so we often stay in relationships just for the sake of the connection that we have, but the connection is not nourishing us in the way that they can. And so we kind of enter this, what I think is kind of like a authenticity crisis, where we're kind of showing up in a relationship only halfway, and we keep hiding parts of us that potentially could leave us feeling rejected or abandoned. And so we people please, we develop strategies in our behavior that keep that connection, but the connection ultimately results in being superficial. And over time that goes to show, and it brings up resentment and frustration that we just don't know how to process. And that's when we start to blame and shame and defend and go into a survival mode, which keeps us ultimately disconnected. And so without the tools and the awareness that there is actually a lot that we can do to improve the way we connect, we're going to stay the same and ultimately think that the only way forward is to break up. And that's really sad, especially when there's children involved. And yeah, we went too far in the relationship. So
yeah, it's always difficult when there are children involved. So you talked about proximity versus intimacy. We can be in the same room but not have a proper relationship or intimate relationship.
Correct.
I know that over COVID time, we were forced to live together 24/7 for days and weeks on end. And that really showed cracks in relationships. And a lot of relationships broke down. Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, I can tell you about my experience. That's exactly what happened to me and Jack at the time we had just moved in together. We'd been together for 2 years. And then suddenly we were faced with each other's presence 24/7. And although we very much enjoyed being around each other, a lot of the unspoken expectations, the unspoken needs, the things that we weren't really speaking came to the surface. And so that's actually when I personally started doing a lot of research to understand what we could have done to improve our communication. And I think a lot of people were really faced with that truth as well, that maybe they hadn't been showing up fully and authentically in their relationship, but they kept busy, right? They had children and work and places to get to and plans to make and fitness goal to achieve and all of these things. So relationships fell by the wayside, and suddenly relationships became the first place of focus. And so that was very difficult and challenging for many people. And so for me included, I think unless we have the skills and we're well equipped to navigate that closeness in a way that serves the relationship and doesn't create more separation, the friction builds up. And that's when the stress levels arise and it becomes a place of stuckness rather than nourishment and enrichment. And I think we saw that.
Yeah, there was a lot of casualties along the way.
Yes.
So what tools can you provide to help relationships?
So many. I think what I do when I work with couples, because I work both with couples and individuals. So with individuals, usually I support them with transitioning into a new relationship. Maybe they come from a broken relationship previously. They don't want to repeat the same mistakes, and they have the awareness to know that they can do better. So they want to come and redefine their values. I think that's always something that's really beneficial, not just for individuals, but for couples as well. It's really important, first of all, I think, that we map our past, not so much to analyze what we come with into the relationship, but what are we bringing into the relationship that's potentially damaging, and how can we clear that? Sometimes we we choose different partners, but we repeat the same dynamics because we haven't learned how to overcome conflict in a really helpful way. And so with couples, redefining values is really important because it brings them to the truth that they're individuals with two different sets of values and past history, relational injuries, the way I like to call them. And it's often those differences that bring the friction. And I help them see how actually two sets of different values and history and so on and so forth can actually add value to the relationship and not take it away. So that's always very interesting to witness when I work with couples, so they can kind of develop better acceptance for their individuality and their uniqueness, and then see where they are already sharing values, which is usually what brings them together. And then we can turn to the future and say, okay, I know where I'm coming from. I know what I'm taking into the now that is from my past that isn't beneficial to our connection, and perhaps something that is beneficial as well, which is to be celebrated. And then I know what my values are today, and I know what your values are. And now we have a level of safety because we learn to communicate our differences in a way that supports us. We can turn to the future and say, okay, what is our shared vision now? What is our goal? What are we moving towards together? And I offer tools also that can support them, not just in the communication, but in terms of like being available to each other on a nervous system level, because oftentimes when we are stressed, that's what causes impact, right? And so I support people in understanding their stress response and how that impacts the relationship, which is always very, very useful because we don't have the luxury to escape from stress. Unfortunately, we are humans and we live under stress all of the times. And we also have a way of reclaiming a sense of safety within ourselves that then obviously shows up in the relationship as well. Many tools, so many things. It really depends and varied on the needs of the couple and the needs of the individual. But bottom line.
Yes, indeed. I mean, you mentioned stress, and a lot of times it's lack of time, lack of money, and then money has a lot of sort of
yes
things, that's brought up a lot in relationships. So how do you cover things like that and having no time, and is he making a living to try and survive?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, first of all, I would say is always a very good start when a couple or people can admit the truth of where they are. Because oftentimes the truth is dismissed, ignored because the stress takes over. So an ability to just slow down and be with each other's in an intentional and quality way, it's very important. Even if that just means 15 minutes a day before going to bed. If you can carve 15 minutes where you can give as much as you have of your capacity at that time to your partner, to the relationship, to be intentional and curious about what is happening for each other and to cultivate empathy and understanding, that can create a lot of trust and safety. You know, we don't have to necessarily buy anything to make each other feel better or do anything that requires a lot of money or time. But sometimes just a kind word, an intention to have the other person feel understood with the right communication frameworks can go a very, very long way. Because ultimately what I believe is that one of the needs, the core needs of a relationship, amongst others, is two needs in one, actually, to feel supported and challenged at the same time. Meaning that you can hold a view that a relationship could be this platform, and it's both a launch pad for you to feel safe, to take risks in life, to go and achieve your dreams as an individual, to become who you are outside of the relationship and into the relationship. And also the relationship becomes a soft space to land, a soft platform to land when life gets tough, and that always begins with understanding, what do I need to feel challenged enough to grow? and what do I need to feel supported and seen when I feel a little bit less resourceful, and how can we meet each other's needs in that way. I think that's just really the core of what a healthy relationship can feel like and look like.
Yeah, empathy, trying to support each other, quite
Yeah,
important, and putting quality time, I'm sure, isn't it? And listening to what the other needs, because sometimes people struggle when they can't grow and be themselves, having that identity. Tell me about that.
absolutely. Yeah, this is interesting. I mean, this is often what happens is we become such a unit in a relationship, which is beautiful. But I find that sometimes, because of the lack of time and the stress and all the things, we often expect our partners to be everything for us, to be our confidant, to be our chef, to be our travel partner, to be our financial partner, and our intimacy person, and all of the things that, of course, we all have capacity to do and become, but it is not realistic to seek for our needs to be met constantly and 100% of the time from one person only. We need to create a support system outside of the relationship as well that helps us feel resourceful and well equipped to take risks and feel encouraged to become who we are, and ultimately know that our partner can be the person who has our own best interest at heart, and that we can do the same for them, but that we cannot expect each other to be that 100% of the time, because then there is the codependency patterns that enter and linger around without us realizing. One of the codependency patterns I was stuck in, for example, which I see a lot, was this pattern of over-functioning and under-functioning. Usually this is very much the over-functioning tend to be the helper, the rescuer, the person who wants the change and the transformation and wants the other partner to be more like them, and cares about the health of the relationship and goes a long way and overextends him or herself to make that change happen. But along the way, he or she abandons their own needs. And then there is the under-functioning person who tends to be less maybe aware of the needs of the relationship, and tends to be more caught up in their own inner world and has a more passive attitude, let's say. Neither of the two are better or worse. They're just dynamics that happen because they're rooted in childhood dynamics. But it's very interesting to see them play out and to see how they're just rooted in unmet needs and unspoken expectations a lot of the time. And so we need to check our expectations, make sure that we don't expect our partners to be everything all at once, I think.
Yeah, because I'm assuming that if you're starting to want to get into a relationship,
Yeah.
versus a relationship that's already standing, and may involve children, and lastly, someone's already divorced, had a broken relationship,
Yes.
separated from the partner, and they're trying to get back on the relationship road.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What I would suggest, as always, is to ask the question, why? Why do I want to be in a relationship right now? Why is this right for me? And I also encourage the person who wants to enter a new relationship, it doesn't matter what kind of circumstances they have, is that they're rooted into their own why, because they want it, because they feel ready to also give something. Or oftentimes we enter relationships expecting to take and to receive, and we forget that it's a mutual exchange. And of course, because as humans, we are wired for connection, but oftentimes we crave a connection out of a need that is unmet. And so we want to make sure that we do our inner work, especially if we come from a broken relationship, to understand, okay, what could have been better? How could I have showed up better in my previous relationship? What are the mistakes that I do not want to repeat? And therefore, what are the skills that I need to build to make sure I don't repeat those mistakes? And even if I do repeat those mistakes, how can I be aware quickly enough that that's what I am doing, so I can learn to repair? And I think that's really important, to have an attitude of self-understanding before going into a relationship, and be humble enough to say, I have something to learn here, and in this next relationship, I will make sure that I prioritize my own personal growth and value the person that I have in front of me and care for them just like I'm learning to care for myself. And slow down in that process. Keep asking yourself, why am I in this relationship? What do I really want? Where are the needs that I want to speak that maybe I wasn't able to speak or didn't feel safe enough speaking in a previous relationship? And where do I need to be curious about the other person so they can feel cared and wanted by me, and be curious about why they want to be in a relationship too. Make sure that we're doing this because our foundation is strong enough, because we're loving ourselves, and therefore now we can give to the other from the overflow, not just out of a need or an attachment that is based on unmet needs from the past. The inner work, I think, is really important.
Thank you. What do we do when we have a long distance relationship? We've got long distance relationships, and we are trying to, we tend to do things virtually, WhatsApp, over, Facebook and all these other things. How do we keep those relationships alive when we're having to travel or use this virtual world?
That's really interesting. I would say agreements can go a long way. I think there is always a rule of thumb of, always trying to avoid having any kind of meaningful conversation over a text, or written arguments and disagreements can never actually truly be resolved. This is always a no-go when I coach clients, and say it's very important that anything needs to be cleared, especially there is conflict or some friction, that it's done whenever you're able to meet in person. This is very, very important. However, I think phone calls, text can also be interesting when it's just a case of maintaining a level of connection, if it's done with agreements that respect the boundaries of the other person as well. Because oftentimes we expect, again, partners to reply to our messages really quickly, and there's this all unspoken expectations that we maybe don't even realize we have, and then we get disappointed when our partners don't meet them, and so we have to be very clear and intentional about the time we spend apart. So say, okay, we are due to have a week apart now. How do we plan to stay connected? What is going to be your capacity? And what is going to be my capacity? And what are the boundaries we need in place to make sure that we don't get caught up in the stories of the mind, and the assumptions that maybe you don't care about me, if you don't reply really quickly or as quickly as I expect you to be, and just be really aware that the mind likes to make up stories that are often not true. And so to make sure that we leave those conversations, if there is any doubt, for when we meet, and then we only use this time whilst we're apart to focus on connection rather than trying to resolve anything. That's always a rule of thumb, really.
Brilliant. Well, it's been fascinating talking to you, Erica. How do people get hold of you? Do you have a website?
I do have a website. It's www.ericamarmai.com, and then the Instagram account, it's Relate Better with Erica, and they're my two main points of contact.
Fabulous. Well, keep on doing the fabulous work you're doing out
Thank
there,
you.
helping with relationships and getting people more intimate and listening more to each other and empathizing. It's been a great pleasure, Erica. And for those listeners, do like and subscribe, and we'll see you soon. Take care.
Amazing. Thank you, Raj. Thank you.